expert group. So we meet once a week. We do training stuff. We're going to do a training at the summit. We're always looking for new members, other subject matter experts. So if something you're interested in, drop it in the chat and we'll reach out to you. But we're going to go around, just introduce our group. So I'll start with me. I'm Rachel Paymer. Like I said, I'm the Welfare Transition and SNAP Program Manager. Go ahead, Javetta, you're next.
Hi, my name is Javetta. I'm Javetta Fleury. I'm from Region 8, and I am the Regional Program Director for the WT and SNAP program.
Taniqua?
Good morning. My name is Torniqua Owens. Excuse me, I'm from Region 6. I am a CDS 4.
And Miss Kathleen?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathleen Danclair from Region 11, the Career Services Advocate Manager for TANF, WT, and POA.
I actually forgot to say I'm from Region 20. We have Ben. He is our favorite IT. It's not an IT, but he's our IT person. So, which region are you from? Suncoast. What region is that, Ben?
18. And
18.
There's a bunch of us on the call today. So thanks, guys.
And we're going to let Marvetta introduce herself and take it away.
Hey, hi, good morning. My name is Marvetta Gordon. I am the Program Manager for Welfare Transition and SNAP Employment Training Programs in Region 13. And I am, let me see if I can get my slides over. And Ben, if you want to go ahead and start the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
So I'd like to,
can you see it? Good.
I can see it. Everyone can see it. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our training today on understanding automation codes for the work registration and NOMA process. I'm excited to present this information to you today on behalf of our Welfare Transition Subject Matter Expert Group, which is made up of Welfare Transition SMEs from regions all across the state. I especially want to thank Jessica Mishler for her attention to detail and diligence in obtaining much needed screenshots from the OSST client site for demonstration purposes. We will cover a lot of material, so I ask that you hold your questions to the end or enter them into the chat where another member of our group may provide an answer during the presentation. So next slide. In previous trainings, we've discussed the work registration process and how it leads to the NOMA, or Notice of Mandatory Action Appointment, Code 492 process. In this training, we will dive deeper into the work registration process as it appears in real work experience by explaining the codes. We will discuss both fully automated work registration codes, manual work registration codes, the NOMA codes, and demonstrating how they appear in the OSST system. Where possible, we will also show the OSST client site view. Next slide. When a customer has been referred by the Department of Children and Families, DCF, on the Florida AGPI screen to work register, the applicant will need to log in to the OSST-client.deo-myflorida.com website to complete their work registration. If the region has selected auto work registration for their applicant default, then the applicant will be required to complete the following steps. Yes, there you go, Ben. Accept the Opportunities and Obligations 499 and complete the client form. The next is to complete the orientation, the 498. Complete the needs assessment, which is code 497, and click checkout, which is code 495. Then a 494 auto work registered code will be system generated for cases that auto work registered. Next slide. As an applicant completes each step in the OSST client site, the codes will appear in the OSST staff site. This example shows an auto work registration completed, listing the code start and end dates as well as status in OSST. Once a step is completed in the OSST client site, it will appear in skill development with a completed status. If the applicant fails to complete a step, it will not appear under skill development. The order of the activities in skill development may not appear in the exact order as shown here, but all codes must be listed in order to have a completed auto work registration. Now, let's go through each step in code to get a better understanding and closer view. Next slide. As mentioned previously, when an applicant is referred to work register, they will need to go into the OSST client site, as seen here on image 1, and log in or click, in image 1, and log in or click new user. They will want to follow carefully the instructions in each section as shown as in this example on image 2. You can refer back to our previous training on work registration to get more information on this section. Next slide. Once the applicant has logged into the OSST client site and the username account is set, the applicant will be prompted to read the opportunities and obligations, the O&O, and click accept as shown in image 1. Once they click submit, they will need to complete the client form, which includes demographic information, employment characteristics, employment and veteran info as shown here in image 2. If they have work registered in the past, they will want to review the client form information for accuracy. Once the applicant completes the O&O and the client form in the OSST client system, the 499 code will roll into the OSST system as seen here in image 3. If the applicant does not accept the O&O or complete the client info screen, then the 499 code will not roll into OSST and would result in an incomplete work registration and bring the applicant back to the login screen, informing them of a deadline to complete the work registration. Next slide. Once the applicant completes the 499, we will see the welcome screen, welcoming them to the one-stop service tracking system, OSST. The view may be different for those who are new applicants to the OSST client site, as seen in image 1, and those who are returning applicants to the OSST client site, and who have previously completed the orientation in the past, as seen here in image 2. The applicant, whether new or returning, will want to start with step 1 orientation, which is code 498. The applicant will click the hyperlinks under step 1 that states click here. Once the applicant completes the orientation and acknowledgement info in OSST client and clicks submit, the code 498 will roll into OSST staff system under skill development as seen here in image 3, welfare transition orientation 498. Next slide. After step 1 is completed, the instructions in step 2 will change and the applicant will want to read those instructions and complete the intake screening by clicking the hyperlink that states click here as seen in image 1. The applicant will be prompted to complete a needs and barrier assessment questionnaire. Once the applicant completes the needs and barrier questionnaire, the code 497 will roll into the OSST system as completed under skill development as seen here in image 2. WT Applicant needs assessment, 497. If an applicant starts the assessment and does not finish, the needs and barrier assessment will stay in progress under the skill development screen until completed or timed out. The applicant will need to complete the full needs and barriers assessment to have completed the step of work registration and for the 497 to read into the OSST system. Next slide. After the needs and barriers assessment code 497 is completed, the applicant will need to click check out as seen here in image 1. The customer did not complete checkout. This customer did not complete checkout. Therefore, the system generated note did not roll into the DCF Florida system. The customer needed to log back into the OSST client to click the checkout. Once the applicant clicks checkout, then code 495 will roll into the OSST system under skill development along with code 494 WT auto work registered, showing that the applicant completed all steps and they are completed in auto work registration as seen here in image 2. Next slide. Once the checkout is completed in OSST client and the work registration is successful, this is the final page. The customer has completed all their work registration steps that have been indicated for their automated work registration. Step 3 result page directions changed to you have been work registered successfully. We will notify DCF. If the customer answered yes to confidential questions, the result page will include a link to direct them to available resources. Next slide. Once the applicant has completed all steps for auto work registration, an automated note will roll into the Department of Children and Families Florida system, as seen in image 1, the next business day stating customer completed work registration process, as seen in image 2. Next slide. If a customer contacts your region and states Department of Children and Families has not received an alert from CareerSource showing they completed work registration, you will be able to go into the OSST system, look up the applicant, and click skill development to see if the applicant completed all the work registration steps. In this example, why did the customer's automated work registration note not roll into Florida? Anybody? I think folks are on mute, so I'll go ahead and give the answer.
Assessment isn't done.
Yeah, the applicant only completed the O&O 499. The applicant still needs to complete the orientation 498, intake screening needs and barrier assessment code 497, and click checkout code 495. The applicant will want to log back into OSST client to complete the missing requirements. Okay. So, next slide. If the region has selected manual work registration for their applicant default, then the applicant will be required to complete the following OSST client site steps and any additional steps required by the region. Looks familiar, doesn't it? The O&O, code 499, the complete orientation, code 498, complete the needs assessment, 497, and click checkout, code 495, and then additional steps that may be required by regions who elected manual work registration option. For example, employ Florida registration, including employment background, resume, and apply for a minimum of 1 job, or attending a welfare transition program orientation on site, etc. May vary per region. Once the applicant has completed the OSST client site work registration steps, then the WT manual work Code 493 code will be system generated. Please note, if there is a sanctioned alternative plan screen, the WT Compliance Authorization Activity Code 487 will need to be manually opened to allow work registration to be completed as a sanctioned compliance activity. We will discuss this more in upcoming slides. Next slide. As an applicant completes each step in the OSST client site, as previously discussed in the auto work registration section, the codes will appear in the OSST staff site as shown here. The OSST client site and staff views are the same as earlier presented for auto work registration and manual work registration up to this point. The difference from auto work registration and manual work registration is code 494. The auto work registration populates on the completion of the auto work registration and system generates a note to the CLR screen in the Florida system, whereas in manual work registration, code 493 populates, which requires staff to result or close the activity. Please note where codes 487 and 493 are open, closing the 487 will also close the 493 automatically, as well as lift sanction listed on the alternative plan screen. Next slide. The Welfare Transition Manual Work Registered Code 493 is system generated when the customer completes the work registration steps required in the OSST client site as seen in image 1. Number 1 on this slide shows the Welfare Transition Manual Work Registered Activity Code 493 still in progress. It remains in progress until manually closed by staff as shown in number 2 or timed out. This allows staff to verify the region's additional work registration steps have been completed before the WT Manual Work Registered Code 493 is closed. Please note, if there is a sanction on the alternative plan screen and the WT Compliance Authorization Code 487 is open on the skill development screen, then staff, after verifying all work registration steps have been completed, will close the Welfare Transition Compliance Authorization Code 487 as completed, which will initiate a system-generated action that will lift the sanction on the alternative plan screen and close the WT Manual Work Registered Code 493. Next slide. As noted on the last 2 previous slides, the WT Compliance Authorization Code 487 is entered by staff to allow a customer who is currently sanctioned on the alternative plan screen to gain access to the OSST client site system where they complete the online work registration process as their sanction compliance activity. This also allows the customer to log back in to complete any remaining online requirements not completed within the 10-day time frame. Please note, once the customer has completed all of the region's work registration process requirements, staff will close the WT Compliance Authorization Code 487 as completed, as seen in image 1, which will initiate a system-generated action that will lift the sanction on the alternative plan screen and close the Welfare Transition Manual Work Registered Code 493 as seen in image 2. Next slide. As an applicant completes each step in the OSST client site as previously discussed in auto work registration section, the codes will appear in the OSST staff site as shown here. This example shows manual work registration completed, listing the code start and end dates as well as status in OSST. Once a step is completed in the OSST client site, it will appear in skill development with a completed status. If the applicant fails to complete a step, it will not appear under skill development. The order, and please note the order of the activities and skill development may not appear in the exact order as shown here, but each step completed in OSST site will be listed. Next slide. Once the applicant has completed all the steps for manual work registration, including verification that the region's additional work registration steps have been completed, then staff will enter a case note in the Florida system as shown here. Additional details required in the case note may vary by region. Next slide. If during the OSST client step 2 intake screening on the needs assessment, customer states yes to the needs assessment question, are you providing full-time care for a disabled family member? Then a document submission code 489 will populate in the OSST system. As discussed in our work registration training, the customer will be directed to have a need for care form completed by their family member's licensed medical doctor and turn it into their local career source center. Next slide. If the customer turns in a completed need for care form, close the 489 with completed. The need for care will need to be sent to the Department of Children and Families for a code 64 need for care exemption to be added to the AGPI screen. The steps on how to handle the need for care may vary by region, so get with your region supervisor for direction. Next slide. Once a customer receives cash assistance and is referred to the Welfare Transition Program on the Assistance Group Program Information or AGPI screen in the DCF Florida system, the applicant will change from applicant status to mandatory, prompting a code 492 WT NOMA. It's the notice of mandatory activity or appointment. To system generate, and it will appear on the skill development screen in the skill development section of OSST. A detailed training will follow this training on the NOMA process. However, in the meantime, here are codes you will want to remember. Code 492, as previously stated in the Notice of Mandatory Activity Appointment, also referred to by most regions as the 492 NOMA. 491 WT Mandatory Initial Assessment. The mandatory participant will be instructed by the NOMA letter to go back into the OSST client to complete the remaining sections of the initial assessment. And code 407, Initial Assessment CM. If the customer does not complete the initial assessment or unable to complete their initial assessment by the time of their intake appointment, then the case manager or career advisor will need to go under the assessments in the OSST system to complete the initial assessment with the mandatory participant. If the case manager or career advisor completes an initial assessment with the customer, it will generate a code 407 initial assessment CM for case manager or career manager. Now let's look at the screens to see how this looks. Next slide. This is the WT NOMA 492 system generated letter. How this process works will be discussed in detail at our upcoming training. Once a 492 has been generated under skill development, this letter will be system generated and mailed to the customer, unless they have elected for online communication. The customer has 7 days, or it can be longer depending on holiday or weekend mailing, to log back into OSST system and to complete the requirements indicated on the NOMA letter. In this example, the letter was mailed on August 2nd of 2021. And the last date the participant can go in and complete the online requirements and any supplemental requirements required is August 9th, 2021. On August 10th, 2021, if a case manager or career manager or career advisor has not ended a code 492, the system will move forward with the pre-penalty process and mail the notice of failure to participate. The area highlighted in blue on this WT NOMA letter is the section where each region has the ability to include supplemental information that is based on their region's requirements for the participant to follow. For example, on this WT NOMA, the region requires, on this WT NOMA letter, the region requires the participant to a given address to set up an appointment to see a career specialist, case manager, career advisor, etc. In order to end the NOMA, the case manager will enter the actual end date and select save. We will be going over this in more detail at our upcoming NOMA training. Next slide. You will see in image 1 the customer's view in OSST client. Once a NOMA letter is received, a mandatory participant will need to log into the OSST client system where they will be able to see their NOMA letter by clicking here as the arrow points. In image 2, you will see the staff view. Here, the system generated the activity code WT NOMA 492. The actual start date is the date the NOMA was mailed and it is in progress. Because the NOMA process has not been completed, the case manager can click on View Letters Mailed to Customer to see the NOMA 492 letter that was mailed to the participant. Next slide. Once the customer has previewed their NOMA letter, they will move to step 2 in the OSST client site to complete their initial assessment as instructed in the NOMA letter by clicking Click Here as seen in this image. Next slide. Once the customer clicks Click Here in OSST client, it will direct them to complete their initial assessment questionnaire as seen in image 1. Once the customer starts this process as seen in image 2, it will system generate a code 491 WTMN, initial assessment, in the OSST staff system under skill development. The customer has not completed their initial assessment yet, therefore WTMN initial assessment shows in progress. Next slide. Once the customer has completed their initial assessment in the OSST client, the system generated WTMN initial assessment code 491 will close with completed as seen here. The mandatory participant is then directed on their WT NOMA letter with additional supplemental requirements as directed by each region. For example, to contact their Career Source Center for a scheduled intake appointment. This process will be discussed more in our upcoming NOMA training. Next slide. If the customer is unable to complete their initial assessment in the OSST client, or it has not been completed by the time of their intake, then the case manager, as stated earlier, will need to go into the assessment screen in OSST staff system to complete the assessment with their customer. Once the assessment is started by the case manager, the initial assessment CM code 407 will appear under skill development as in progress. Once the case manager completes the assessment with the mandatory, the participant and clicks save, the initial assessment CM code 407 will close with completed as seen here. Next slide. Do you have any questions? That concludes our presentation on understanding automation codes for work registration and NOMA. I do not believe we have the option to change the color of the hyperlink. That's an OSST client site system issue. Okay, well, if we have no questions, I think we can stop recording and thank you all for showing up to hear our presentation on work registration.
Well done, Marvetta. Well done, well done.
Awesome job.